Hey guys, today I'm going to run through a drum mix I did for the band Animate. It's for a video for the channel Drummers Anonymous, and it was filmed in March 2020. I've seen a few people in the comments on that Drummers Anonymous video, plus a few others I've done, where people think I'm using samples or MIDI drums or triggers and whatnot. So this is just a walkthrough explaining how I mixed these drums and how I didn't use samples. So let's get into it. Oh, and let me know if I should do some more of these, because I have the band Currents that I did mix for, and Greyhaven, and some other ones. So let me know. Here's the Pro Tools session for the whole set. Today we're just going to look at the song Cloud Cascade. And if I pop into the mix window, you can see that I have all my drum channels here in red that are feeding into this drum bus. Then I have my bass bus, guitar bus, tracks bus, and all that is fed to a master output. And really quickly, on the master, I have Slate VTM. I have FG Gray from Slate, just to add a little bit of compression, mostly on the snare hits. I was playing around with Pro MB, so I tried this out on it. I just set it to the basic 4-band punch and balance preset. And then Pro L to gain up everything and add some limiting on a lot of the loud snare hits. Then over on my drum bus, I have Waves SSL comp that's doing some compression also on the snare hits. So with the mix bus plugin set, we'll take a listen to the raw drums. Cool, let's get started with the overheads. I'm gonna solo them. And the first thing I did is I added this Waves C1 compressor. Really any compressor can work here. And this is just to control the overheads. It's a little more aggressive than I would normally do for the compression, but about 8 dB of gain reduction, but that's okay. Next, I fed that into this EQ. As you can see, I cut a little bit of the low mids and the upper mids and included this high pass filter to get rid of a lot of the weird rumbly low end from the stage. That's what that low end sounds like. So before and after those plugins? Before? Cool. Then I will add in the kick, which is what I do next normally. First thing I'll do is get a blend of the raw kick in and kick out that I like. I can already tell that I like this kick in a lot. It already sounds really punchy and clear. Great, and I like that blend between them. First thing I added was this Spl Transient Designer. This is great to add attack, and I'm cutting some sustain to make it tighter and a little bit punchier, and then bringing down the overall volume. So let's listen to that. And I really like what that does to it. It almost acts like a little bit of a gate too. Then I added a real gate, FabFilter Pro G. I set the attack to 0, the look ahead to about 5, the hold to about 50 milliseconds, and the release to about 125 milliseconds. Then I bring the threshold down and I'm gonna start playing it and bring up the threshold until all the snare hits are getting cut out. Awesome. Next, the EQ for the kick drum. And the EQ can really make or break the kick drum sound. I'm gonna start from scratch. And the first thing I normally do is I cut some of the lows out. This is super, super low stuff that honestly I can't really hear with these AirPods right now. The next is the very important cut, and that is usually between 100 and 200 hertz. And it's really gonna cut out some of the muddiness in the kick. It's gonna make it sound a little bit bigger and deeper, but overall it sounds really good. So let's try it out. So I'm just gonna bypass that EQ curve so you can hear before and after. And then a lot of times I will just go in and look for more stuff to cut out. And I like that where it's at. The next thing I did was cut out some of this 500 to 2 kilohertz range. And we'll go in and listen to that for a second. And you can kind of hear, this is mostly from the kick in mic. It's this kind of this crunchy sound, and I want to get rid of some of it. And so actually I'm gonna not do what I did previously, and I'm gonna add in a EQ on just on the kick in and find that same frequency range. And I'm gonna cut some of it out. And it's gonna make the kick sound like a little smoother in a way, which is kind of a weird word to use, but it's what I got. So just like 2 or 3 dB in there. And then I'm gonna go back to the main kick bus EQ and mess with the high end. And so for some kicks, you kind of got to go crazy here and boost a lot to get some of that click and some of that attack back in. But Trey's kick is already sounding good, so I don't need to add too much. About 3 or 4 dB. Next, I use Waves' F6 plugin, which is a multi-band compressor. And I use it to control the high end above 2K to control some of the click and attack on the kick drum. And so it's set to reduce some of the high end when it gets too loud. So let's take a listen. So on some of the softer hits, it's only reducing it just a little bit. And on the louder hits, it's reducing it more. So it kind of evens out the high end clickiness. So let's hear before and after. Cool. Then next I added Slate VMR to add in this compressor. It's the FG116. And the kick drum already sounds really good, but I want to level out some of the kick hits. So let's see what we have here. So here's before and after. Sweet. Next, I'm going to go through snare. First, I'm going to get a blend of the snare drum. This is just a snare top here. And that sounds good where it's at. So first I threw on Pro MB to both the snare top and the snare bottom. And this is a common trick that reduces a lot of the high end, but when the snare hits, it brings the high end back just for the start of the snare hit. So if you listen to before and after on the snare top, you'll hear the high end reduced and it'll come back in right when the snare hits. This is before. That is a really great trick. Then I just added a low cut on the snare bottom to get rid of some of the junk down there. Next, and this is similar to what I did for the kick, I added the Spl Transient Designer. Here's before and after. And then Pro G with very similar settings, but an important difference is that the range is only set to 8 dB on the snare drum because I don't want to cut out too much in between snare hits because I will lose ghost notes and it'll sound weird. We'll hear it with the max range so you can hear it. And I usually aim for about 8 dB on the range. Next, I threw on Fab Filter Pro Q2, same EQ that I always use. And first I added a low cut to get rid of everything below the fundamental. I'm gonna boost a little bit. Cut out some junk around 500 hertz. And boost the high end. Let's hear that in context. Sounded pretty good so far. And then finally, I threw on Slate VMR again, and I added a little bit more high end, a little bit of compression from the FG distressor, and a lot of thickness from the revival. Let's hear before and after with this plugin added. I really like the thickness on this revival. If you ever have a really thin sounding snare, this is an old trick I used to do, was just stack a couple of these and boost up the thickness. I don't do that as much anymore, but it's a fun trick I used to do. Next, we'll add in the toms. Trey just uses a rack tom and a floor tom. We'll skip to a part that has some toms in it. That's the rack tom and the floor tom. So not the greatest sounding tom. And I'll just quickly go through what I did on the toms. It's very similar to a combination of what I do for the kick and the snare. So the Pro MV trick to get rid of some of the high end in between tom hits. The Spl Transient Designer to add more attack, but this time didn't decrease the sustain at all. The Pro G set to very similar settings as the kick and snare. And so let's listen to before and after of just those first three plugins. And then I threw on this EQ, and I kind of went a little crazy with it. The tom sounded pretty thin, so I wanted to add in a lot of basically body to it. So let's listen to before and after on that. And it was really important to cut a lot of this 500 to 2K range, because that's a lot of where the nastiness of a poorly tuned tom can come into play. And then finally, just a little bit of compression. I just used the default settings here. I didn't really adjust anything. Next, the floor tom. I use the same settings for the first three plugins, so I'll just turn them on so you can hear them. Next, for the EQ, this is what I ended up doing, boosting a lot of the low end. So let's hear before and after this EQ. And now, just after listening to it again, I'd probably end up going back and cutting some more in this area. It can really, really clear up a tom like that. So before and after. So let's hear the drums so far in context with the bass guitar. Cool. Sounded great so far. The last thing it's missing is room sound. So let's go through that. First, I added a total drum room sound. So I bussed the snare, toms, and cymbals to a drum verb aux and a drum room aux. And for the drum verb, I added Waves' Reverb with these settings, these Hall settings. So I'm going to bring that up. So it's really easy to overdo it if you crank it up. And honestly, in the actual video, I think I did overdo it. So we're gonna make it real subtle. I'm gonna sit it right there. Next, we'll look at the drum room. I added a EQ just to cut out some of this 2K range, and the Slate Verb Suite Classics reverb, which has a ton of great options, and I used the FG480 room sound. So I'm going to mute the other one and bring up the drum room. And I'm just trying to set it so I can just barely hear it. So let's play it and I'll mute them and see if we can hear the difference. It's definitely there, you can hear it, but it's not enough to distract you, but it's just enough to give some life to the drums. So the last thing we're gonna do is add reverb to the snare, and I used basically the same settings as I did on the drum verb as on the snare tracks. So I used the same reverb, the same Pro Q. I did something different here. Why did I do that? We'll find out. And I used the Verb Suite Classics with a different preset. So let's start with the snare verb and bring that one up. And I'm gonna keep that one really low. Then I'll bring in the snare room sound. So listening back, I think I cut out this because it just sounded really harsh going through the reverb. Let's listen again. And we'll bring that in. Okay, and let's hear everything in context. Awesome. Thanks for watching. Let me know if I should do a mix down on the Currents playthroughs from the same night.